Hey, welcome, Illumination Nation. Eugenia Keegan here to show you how to use your Prism. So let's talk about the Prism. Nils, you got your Prism in front of you?
I got my Prism in front of me. Yes, I do.
Okay, so let's take a look at it together. So we've created a triangle that, I want people to recognize that this triangle, it's not like you put a wine in the corner. It's like plotting anything on a chart. Pretend that there are lines in both directions. And as you taste the wine, you look at these descriptors and you look at the corners and try and figure out, where do you think this wine fits inside this prism? So Nils, what are we tasting today?
We are tasting the 2017 Grand Marine Chardonnay and the 2018 inaugural release of Penner-Ash Willamette Valley Chardonnay.
So let's start with the lower left-hand corner. Fresh and sleek.
Fresh and sleek. To me, my first impression on this is Grand Marine. That's where I would put that initially, at least. That's always been where I've put that wine.
It is very interesting to see that these wines, they're not simply one of these things or the other. They really cross-reference. I mean, you know, right away, you look at these wines, you go, well, how am I supposed to sell these against each other? I mean, the obvious questions that come up. So our job is to try and make those questions come up so that we can help create answers.
Or what Rachel and I were talking about earlier, which is, where does a rep in Chicago or a rep in Houston who has a list that maybe doesn't have more than, if it has one Oregon Chardonnay, how do I get that buyer or the shelf set? Where do I put it in terms of California Chardonnays so that I can talk to them about it? Hey, this is similar to a blah, blah, blah style. This is similar to Santa Barbara, similar to Monterey, similar to Russian River. No, but it's similar to one of those areas. And so I want you to think of that while you taste it or try it, in terms of the customers who are going to like this. You may think that you don't have any Oregon Chardonnay fans, but it's just a different style that's similar to this. So think of those customers that you've got and then translate them into, hey, here's something new for you to try. Don't you want to try something that is similar to what you've got, but something new, so you have new stories to tell and something new to pass the time in this endless pandemic?
Yep. Let's talk about the third part of the triangle, intellectual and framed.
To me, it talks about like complexity, like more manipulation rather than less. Is that where you would, in terms of the viticulture and winemaking, is that what you would?
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
If you were a sales rep, could you also use the term frame with regard to the generally higher level of acidity in Oregon Chardonnays as compared to perhaps some of their California counterparts, or the fact that it has that brightness, the freshness, the acid level frames the fruit in Oregon Chardonnays in that way?
Absolutely. If you look at framed as supporting and and not only that, but I think it, as you use the word framed, I really like this. It gives it that sense of focus, and it's just, because the acids do that. When the finish of these wines are long, they're really clean, and it's that beautiful acid. It's what makes you salivate after you drink them and want to come back for more and more, because they're almost salty at the finish. And it's that beautiful acid that does that. You never are left with anything cloying.
Well, and if you look in that thing, one of the things it talks about in terms of viticulture and winemaking, longer élevage or overwintering.
Yes. So instead of bottling the spring or late summer after harvest, it sits all winter and it's the following spring.
And we know that Shane tends to go 12 to 14 months.
That's in barrel.
Right.
Yeah, it's 18 months or so.
So that takes me from the fresh and sleek to, rather than going up like I would with the Penner-Ash, it kind of comes down and occupies the bottom two, whereas the Penner-Ash actually plays a little bit in all three, I would say, because it's not like Kate immediately takes this to, like, she uses more oak, but it's still a little bit less than a quarter. So it's not like she's, pounding away on the wood. And it's 10 months in a barrel. So it's not an insubstantial amount of time, but she's not overwintering it. And if one of the crown reps out there would ask, hey, why have I been drinking Penner-Ash wines for a long time before I started this job? I don't think I've ever seen a Chardonnay from them. and this is our first Chardonnay. Why is this the first time we've done a Chardonnay at Penarash?
Well, I think Kate joined Penarash in 2016, just as we acquired the property, and has been learning and working with Lynn all of these years. And she's done a spectacular job. You can just taste it in all the wines. So the question is, well, what would Kate like to do? And then we said, what about Chardonnay? And Kate, of course, made a lot of Chardonnay in California, and as like most California Chardonnay winemakers, as they've evolved in their own winemaking, getting fruit from Oregon to make Chardonnay is it's a real luxury in a way. Well, Nils, now that we've had a chance to talk through these wines, can you do the honors and the exercise of pinpointing these on the Prism?
With Grand Moraine, I would put mine would float down, but in the bottom two, it'd float between fresh and sleek and intellectual and framed, primarily.
Leaning one way or the other?
It leans more towards fresh and sleek, but this vintage in the 17, as it's warmed up, it really balances back and forth. It kind of swings back and forth depending on probably what I ended up eating with it.
Well, and don't you think also when we first open it, it's a little bit more to your point to the left in
Yep.
green and sleek, but as it aerates and it starts to show all of the beautiful complexity, then it starts to lean over a little bit more to intellectual and framed, I think, as the wine is open.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And then this, the Penarash, I tend to put in generous and energetic, but there are notes of it, in particular flavor notes that are down from fresh and sleek. And then there's the intellectual and framed. So I would put it more firmly at the top of the pyramid, but with deep roots that have dug down into the other two corners.
What's wonderful about that though is that your description implies the complexity of the wine, because it's not just simply one thing. And they might start out as one thing and they evolve a little bit. I think the other place a tool like this can be very valuable is if, to your point, when you talked about a shelf or a list that already had an Oregon Chardonnay, and yet you want to sell a second one in. So the better off you are at identifying the wine that's on the list or the shelf, the better off you are able to talk about what's different about the wine that you're trying to sell in. And I think the Prism can really help identify other wines and help you sell against them.